You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak. I'm one of the hosts of the show, and unfortunately today my lovely co-host Amber Wilcox is unable to join us, but that's okay. We have an awesome guest on today's podcast on I shouldn't say an awesome topic, but a new and interesting topic that we haven't covered on the show before. So I'm really excited. So let me do our quick partner thank you and read our bio so we can bring on our guests. So today's podcast is powered by the National Fire Protection Association. NFPA is a nonprofit that seeks to save lives and reduce loss with information, knowledge, and passion. You can learn more about fire safety and explore their educational resources by visiting nfpa.org. And today's guest knows so much about NFPA. So we have Brian O'Connor on, Brian is a senior engineer in the Technical Services Department at the National Fire Protection Association and a past president of the New England chapter of the Society of Fire Protection Engineers. A licensed professional engineer in Texas and Massachusetts, Brian holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Rowan University and a master's degree in fire protection engineering from the University of Maryland. His expertise spans batteries, water-based fire protection systems, healthcare facilities, and fire extinguishers, with a focus on advancing fire safety through technical guidance and industry leadership. So thank you so much, Brian, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Couldn't be more excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I know I just read your bio, but we always love to start the show just learning a little bit more about our guests. So if you can just tell us a little bit more about yourself and maybe how you got interested in the fire protection industry.
Yeah, definitely. So I can start with that. I kind of grew up in a house with my dad as a firefighter. He was FDNY for almost 40 years. He actually just retired this past year. So, good on him for that. But that definitely sparked my interest in firefighting and things like that. And then in school, I just was really interested in the sciences. I did mechanical engineering. I actually didn't really know fire protection engineering was a thing until I kind of graduated. I worked in construction a little bit and got my toes wet into safety engineering and that's how I found NFPA, fire protection engineering. And it seemed like it combined a lot of the worlds I was interested in. So I joined NFPA. I've been there for just about 10 years now. I worked on a lot of different topics. I've been able to be exposed to a lot of the different, things NFPA works on, which we work on a lot of different things. And then one of the projects I was assigned pretty early in my career was working with lithium-ion batteries. It was a pretty new topic when I first started, even though batteries were still in a lot of different things. We were seeing fire hazards with those. I was fortunate to be able to work on NFPA 855, which is a standard we have for energy storage systems, which are oftentimes lithium-ion battery powered. So I learned a lot for batteries. I learned a lot on the topic of batteries through that, which has been good. But yeah, so then I've been working with NFPA, fire protection systems, portable fire extinguishers, healthcare, a lot of different topics, and it's been great.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, today we really are going to be talking so much about lithium ion batteries. And, I kind of said at the beginning, they're, I wouldn't say obviously newer, but we've been hearing a lot more about them on the news, online, on social media, things like that. So, can you just kind of break it down of what is a lithium ion battery and I guess, how do we recognize one?
Yeah, definitely. So like you said, lithium and they're lithium-ion batteries. Yeah, they've been around for a little while now. I mean, they think they were invented in the 80s, but they really just recently become cheaper and better at being batteries. So we see them pretty much everywhere. They're And I think that they hit that sweet spot of being really good at being batteries. They're pretty cheap, they're pretty durable, and they're relatively safe. But with that, they do have certain hazards that we're really just not used to. And I think that's kind of where we're seeing a lot of these incidents. People aren't used to seeing a battery start producing a lot of flammable gas, cause explosion hazards, can cause fires pretty quickly. And that's something that is now in areas where risk for fire hasn't been. So we're seeing a lot of these lithium-ion batteries, and I think the way you recognize a battery is, well, first of all, they're portable source of electricity. The big difference between lithium-ion batteries and a lot of other ones are lithium-ions are the rechargeable ones. There are a lot of different types of lithium batteries in general. So you might see lithium metal batteries. You can get a AA lithium metal battery, and that's kind of a one-time use battery. But if you see something that's reusable secondary battery, it's typically going to be a lithium-ion battery, just because that's kind of the cheapest, best battery we're seeing these days. But we're seeing them in a lot of new applications as well. We obviously see electric vehicles being used more and more. We see larger installations like energy storage systems, which are pretty much big battery banks that you can charge and discharge. But we see them in smaller things too. We see them in electric bicycles, electric scooters, even electric wheelchairs and golf carts. So that's kind of like a one step down from your electric vehicle. It's a mobility device that we're seeing them, but they still have really big batteries, and they're very mobile. So we're being able to see these big batteries being able to go pretty much anywhere. And then below that, we have batteries in phones, laptops, power tools, toys, tablets. We're seeing them in a ton of consumer electronic devices. Anything that needs electrical power, a lithium-ion battery is a cheap, good solution for someone looking for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, the like e-scooters, my husband had one for work, and I know that had that type of battery in it. And, the holidays weren't that long ago, and there was an increase, I guess, of, messages, at least that I saw, especially from NFPA and other organizations of, when you're buying gifts and toys and things like that, making sure you know what type of battery or what type of products, not just opening it and throwing away that safety card that's inside, making sure you take a look at that. But I guess, what causes, and, there's fires caused by so many different things, but what causes lithium ion batteries to, why is there an increased risk, or why are we seeing more of them happening?
Yeah, so lithium-ion batteries, they do a great job of being a battery. They have a lot of energy, and they put it in a small footprint. It's great for being a battery, but it's really difficult if that energy is released in an uncontrolled way. Then it generates a lot of heat. That heat can kind of turn the internal parts of that battery into a flammable gas. It's also pretty toxic for people. And then you kind of see that battery cell pressurized as it's getting heated up by that release of energy. And then all of a sudden it's going to find a seam once it gets pressurized, and you're going to see flammable gas being shot out of a pretty warm battery. If it finds an ignition source, you're going to have a kind of a blowtorch effect and see a battery fire happen pretty quickly. And then oftentimes you'll see batteries are made up of a lot of different small cells, or a lot of the same small cells. And so once you have one cell that fails, all the cells around it will start to melt and have their own discharge of energy. So it's kind of a cascade effect that's very difficult to stop. We're seeing this in a lot of places because if you physically damage a battery, it causes kind of a short circuit inside the battery, and that's what kind of can start this chain reaction. And it's also the fact that there are a lot of really expensive things that use batteries, and there's a lot of things that are pretty cheap that use batteries. If you buy something on the cheaper end, there might be less safeguards there for the batteries. There might be less, smart technology to monitor those batteries. And so they might be more susceptible to having an incident that you're unaware of. We're seeing more of these fires because we're seeing these batteries used more and more. The United States in general, we're producing more lithium-ion batteries than ever before. The world is producing more lithium-ion batteries than ever before. They're being used in everything, and they're being used in a lot of things that we don't necessarily know about as well. That's something that the recycling and waste management industry has been dealing with. They've been doing what they've been doing, trying to recycle what they can and putting through waste and shredders what they can't. And when lithium-ion batteries come into play, they can start these fires that shut down production, that cause these larger fires and these incidents. So that's something that they've been dealing with and trying to figure out what to do, because these batteries are, they're in t-shirts with lithium-ion batteries in them now. They're found pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that too. I guess, and that's a great question of how do you properly dispose of one of these batteries?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is probably to bring it to someone who sells a lot of lithium-ion batteries. If they sell lithium-ion batteries, they're pretty much required in most states to accept those batteries back as recyclable. Your big box stores are pretty common. You'll see, hey, put your batteries here once you walk into them. That's probably the best thing to do. You can bring them to waste management sites. They might have specific bins, or recycling centers might have specific bins for lithium-ion batteries or just batteries in general. What you don't want to do is you don't want to throw them in the garbage can. You don't want to, I don't know, put them in glass recycling. I'll put them in the proper recycling. But yeah, so that's what you want to do when they're at the end of their life. One thing is to make sure that if you are recycling or putting these batteries somewhere, if they are damaged, maybe that's something that you want to make someone aware of, or you might want to drop it off at a firehouse if it's a big enough battery, because damaged batteries can lead to fires, and you don't want to, put a damaged battery in a recycling bin or a big box store if you think it's going to cause an issue.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not necessarily like certain devices or, like an e-scooter, again, going back to that, because I see those fires in the news. It's not necessarily that e-scooters have a higher risk. It's if you're buying maybe a lower quality e-scooter with a lower quality battery, that could heighten your risk, or are certain devices, I guess, more prone?
I think certain devices are more prone only because of how you use them. Like I'll give the example of an e-scooter. You might knock your e-scooter over, drop it. It might get a little bit more beat up than, say, electric vehicle. Electric vehicle may be a little bit more expensive. You maybe take a little bit better care of it. Electric scooters, you can fold up, throw in the trunk of your car, it bounces around a little bit. So I think anything that uses a lithium-ion battery that's a little bit more prone to being damaged. E-bikes, we see all the time, people just kind of like knock over their e-bikes. They get in a small crash, which they might fall over and scratch a little bit, and they say, that's fine. Same things happen with our cell phones, right? You drop your cell phone, you don't go, well, I guess I should get a new cell phone. You go, yeah, it's probably fine. There's a little bit of a scratch in it. I can live with that for now. Or, oh, I have a case, so I think that protected it. So I think anything that's more prone to damage is really where we're going to see more incidents with these, or at least a higher rate.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And so our phones have these batteries in it, most of them?
Yeah, so I wager 99+% of all consumer cell phones have lithium-ion batteries in them. I think it would be it's interesting because when you look at something like an e-scooter, an e-bike, they probably cost somewhere around $200 to $500. You can get an expensive one, maybe $1,000. But that's probably how much your cell phone costs, right? $1,000. Yeah. And your cell phone's going to have a little bit more, monitoring. It's going to say, hey, the cell phone's too hot. We're not going to charge it anymore. And that the cell phone brain kind of does that. If you're doing something with an e-bike or an e-scooter, if it is something kind of on the lower end, it might not have that technology in there to say, oh, I recognize it's too hot in this room, I'm going to stop charging it. Or it's too cold, I'm going to shut the phone down, or I'm going to shut the thing down. So there are some technologies that have a couple more safeguards in there for the longevity of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've gotten that on my phone before. Living more in the South, it gets hot down here, and it'll pop up and say like, or not so much I can't charge it, I can't use it because it got too hot.
Exactly.
So things like that, like you said, yeah, kind of have that brain already worked in there for us. Yeah. But do you have, I guess, obviously not all devices have, that warning. What are some other, I guess, like best practices that consumers can follow to make sure that they're staying safe?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you're buying a product that's been tested and listed. You can kind of see that lots of them have that shown. You might see something like it says UL listed
Mm,
to a certain standard, which means it's gone through a lot of testing to make sure it can be dropped. It can be, go through vibrations. It can be, damaged a little bit and not cause a huge fire. Um, Oftentimes, if you buy from well-known, reputable manufacturers, that's something that you can kind of take for granted by saying, "Hey, I know that they're going to do the testing." It's always good to make sure that they do it, to check for that. Um, Other than that, I'd say watch out for things like knockoffs or something. If sometimes if it's too good to be true, it is too good to be true, or it seems too good to be true. Um, so if you're buying something that, an e-bike for $40 and it has a giant battery in it, you might go, okay, that's
mhm,
something that, I might want to question. Um, so other than that, things that have been kind of tampered with, I know that there's a secondary market for e-bikes and for scooters and mobility devices like that. People who might DIY it, add a battery themselves or say, "Oh, this battery isn't working. I'm going to switch out some of the cells and solder it myself." There are way too many YouTube videos on out there teaching you how to do these things. So I'd say keep an eye out. Make sure if you're buying something secondhand that it hasn't been tampered with. Um, Other than that, I'd say use the equipment that comes with it. Use the charger that it comes with, or something that the manufacturer recognizes as to be safe with that product. Sometimes using a different charger can either charge it too quickly or too slowly, or discharge it too quickly. So those things can kind of lead to the breakdown of a battery. I think those are kind of just some of the major things. Other than that, make sure you're not storing it anywhere it's too cold or too hot. Make sure you're not still storing your battery powered device in somewhere that's dangerous, like the top of the stairs. Um,
mm,
Something that we're seeing more and more is especially with these more medium sized e-bikes and e-scooters, is that they're used in cities, right? Because it's an easy way to get around the city. It's better than cars. You can use the bike lanes and things like that. And so people take them, use them all the time. They usually will invest in a nice one. So they say, I don't want to leave it outside. Someone might steal it. It's pretty expensive. It's a nice
mhm,
e-bike. Let me bring it up to my apartment. But it was just raining. I'm not going to drag this dirty e-bike through my apartment. I'm going to leave it right next to my only exit, the door. That's something that we're seeing a lot, because then if it does catch on fire, if there's an incident, your only escape route is blocked. So that's something you have to be careful of. We definitely do not recommend putting your e-bikes or e-scooters right next to your front door if you live in an apartment. Um, that's something that we have to, be a little bit more careful of. And I think that's something too, is just the public being more cognizant that these fires can and do happen. So be prepared for that. If you do see smoke coming out of one of them, get out of there. A fire is probably going to be pretty close behind.
mhm. Yeah, that's such a good call out about the apartments. And like I said, my husband had one and he would bring it in, or he would just leave it in his truck because he was like, it's in the bed. But then that goes back to your earlier point of it gets pushed around back there, could have gone damaged. So, um, some of those things definitely got to keep top of mind.
Yeah, that definitely resonated with me, the example, because I did that with my bicycle every day in the city, and I thought, well, yeah, if I had an e-bike, I'd store it there too, because it's my bicycle. It's
Hmm.
hard enough to carry up some stairs. Now I don't want to drag it through my apartment.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's something that, and we have seen these incidents in New York City, especially where they've led to fires where people have perished. So it's something to keep in mind, and to realize you don't want to block, if your window is going to be your means of escape, you don't want to put it under a window either. Making sure where you're charging it in a location that if it does catch on fire, you know, you don't expect it to catch on fire, but you want to be able to survive if that does
Yep,
happen.
definitely. And let's say whether it's an e-bike or a toy that has this battery or something like that, let's say you notice it's getting hot. Or what can you do to, I don't know if you can do anything to cool it down, or kind of what would you recommend if you see some of these warning signs?
And I think it's tough because it depends on kind of what condition the battery's in.
Mm,
If it's in a place that's, I think that the default is to leave your house and call the fire department. That is always going to be the best route. Um, but if it's just a battery that maybe looks a little swollen or something, you might be able to take that battery out, put it in an area where it's not going to catch anything else on fire, maybe your front lawn or something, or maybe the middle of the sidewalk if that's where the nearest safe location is, and then call the fire department. It really depends on kind of what's happening. If it's at the point where smoke or something is coming out of the battery, I would say don't touch it. Get out of that place and call the fire department. But it depends on kind of at what stage of failure that battery's at, and how comfortable you are with kicking it, out the door or trying to get out of there. But I would say try not to extinguish it. That's a firefighter's job. I think they're a lot better at it. They know how not to put themselves in danger as well. You don't want to your exit to be between you and the thing that's catching on fire. They're trained to handle that a little bit better than I'd say the average person.
For sure. When in doubt, just call your local fire department. They're always happy to help.
Exactly. They'd rather come out and say, okay, well, it's not a big deal than to not be called and have to come to a burning house.
Definitely. But that brings up another good kind of question I had. With, let's say a lithium-ion battery does catch on fire, we'll obviously leave it to, the firefighters and fire departments to put it out. But can you put it out with water? Or why was I thinking that there was something different you had to do?
Yeah, so I think that's a common misconception. You can use water on lithium-ion batteries. People say, well, you don't want to mix electricity and water. You really shouldn't have a shock hazard if you're putting water on it from a distance. First responders and firefighters, we recommend to use water. It cools that battery really well, and that's what you're trying to do is cool that battery below the temperature at which it's going to stop propagating to the neighboring cells. It's typically very insulated, and they call it a deep-seated fire. So it's pretty hard to cool. Water's readily available, good to cool. Foam isn't as effective. Gaseous agents usually aren't as effective as water, but so copious amounts of water is the phrase we typically use to say what firefighters should do when they show up to a battery that's on fire.
Gotcha. And is there, I guess, any other differences that you know of between, I don't know, like a natural occurring fire versus a battery fire?
So I think the growth rate is pretty different. It depends on what it is. You can say, is a gasoline fire a naturally occurring fire? But yeah, so they grow pretty quickly just because there's a lot of fuel. There's a lot of heat that goes on with we call it a chain reaction. And there's actually even oxygen that gets produced. So trying to starve it of oxygen is only so effective. These battery fires are typically just because we mentioned the way these batteries fail is when they get physically damaged. So how do we prevent that? We wrap them in plastics, we wrap them in metal, we wrap them in cushioning, and that is going to make it really hard to cool that battery because we're trying to protect that battery physically from damage. Now it's also protected from water getting to it to cool it off. So that kind of, especially with electric vehicles, is something that makes them that much more difficult. For firefighters, it's something unique because there's the additional shock hazard. When you are cleaning up a fire, you want to make sure that they're using metal tools. You don't want to contact an electrical device and shock yourself. So there's extra precautions that need to happen there. Something else that's very unique about lithium-ion battery fires is their propensity for reignition, so that you can think it's completely extinguished, but deep inside that battery, it could still have some electrical discharge happening. And it could take minutes, hours, days, weeks, even months later, it can reignite. That's what we see a lot happening at these waste management facilities, is that you might see an electric vehicle catch on fire a month later that you thought was fully extinguished, but turns out it might have been fully extinguished to the untrained eye, but inside they still had some stranded energy, some stranded electrical energy that was producing heat and reigniting that fire.
Wow, that's kind of wild to think about, when you kind of think like, oh, I put out the fire, it's done, I can move on type of thing. But that's crazy that, a week later or longer, it could reignite if not properly, taken care of.
And it's not something that only firefighters have to worry about too. If you have something that catches on fire, you throw it in your backyard and you go, oh, okay, it burnt out. It's fine. I'm going to put it in my garbage can now. Light that garbage can on fire. It's not necessarily a safe thing, a safe place for it to be. And then we see tow truck drivers also having to deal with this. If there's a fire and it's extinguished, Not so much anymore because we now know that there's a risk of reignition, but previously tow truck drivers were getting injured because they were towing an electric vehicle. They see, wow, it's on fire again in the bed of my truck. Let me try to dump it and call the fire department. And while they're trying to get the vehicle off their truck to save their truck, they can get injured. And so that's something that adds more complications. It takes more time for first responders. So if we do see a lot of electric fires or electric battery fires, it's going to take a lot more firefighting resources and time than we probably would have seen with other similar sized fires.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great point. Well, I always love having, someone from NFPA or anyone really in the fire protection industry on, because, I learn so much. And sometimes I get in my head, and I'm sure some of our listeners do too, of like, I'm a burn survivor. I should like be on the top of my game when it comes to like all things fire safety and prevention. And it's crazy how much I'm just learning already today. And definitely some things. My husband doesn't drive the scooter anymore. His new job has parking, so he doesn't need it. But I would definitely be giving him a safety lesson when he got home today, if he was.
And I think that's one of the biggest things with lithium-ion batteries. I think public education is such a huge portion of this, because the more people know about that, just the more, even if you're not safer with them, that that's a possibility. That, hey, I'm not going to store my e-scooter under my bike, or I'm not going to sleep with my phone under my pillow, because not only, is it probably not good for the battery, it could cause a fire, it could cause something bad to happen. So just the more people know about it, the better. I always try to, make the comparison of, a lot of people might have like a tank of propane somewhere around their house for a grill, right? And that's a gas fire if you have one. And a lithium-ion battery can have a pretty similar fire, but you're going to treat a tank of propane maybe a lot better than you would treat your e-bike, right? You might say, if I drop my tank of propane, there's a huge dent in it, I might go check something out. I might replace it. If I drop my e-bike and a piece of plastic breaks off of it, let me make sure if it works, and I might still use it. So I think just trying to raise that level of awareness that these batteries can cause fires. Not that they always do, but that the possibility is there, I think, is a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, even just a few minutes ago when I was asking about, do you use water to put one out or not? Like, even just, getting more educated on if this does occur, or what are the warning signs? How do you treat it? How do you, put it out if you can, when to call the fire department, things like that are so important.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things too, I think that generally keep in mind with lithium-ion batteries, any type of battery, is that these batteries, they work, and they're just kind of how they're made is they're rolled up of a bunch of different layers. They come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, so they're not always going to look like your AA battery. They can look like a prismatic, which are kind of those, you might see a rectangular, kind of those old cell phone batteries. That's just kind of one big spiral. You might see them in pouches, which are soft pouches. You might see them in coins, like you might see in a smartwatch or something, like it just looks like a coin. So they come in all shapes and sizes. And the way these batteries work is that there's call them an anode, a cathode, which are your positive and negative terminals, basically, and then a very thin plastic separator between them. And the way these batteries work, you connect positive to negative, and you put something between them, and electrons flow through it to power it. And so if that small separator in the battery is damaged somehow, it's going to cause a short circuit within the battery, generates a lot of heat, and causes this fire instance to start. And so anything that you think can damage a 0.001 inch thick piece of plastic is what's going to damage this battery, because that's typically what is it's typically made of plastic. It's very, very thin, because it needs to be thin because lithium ions need to pass through it. And so anything that's going to damage that, you can say, could potentially cause, a fatal damage to these batteries, which means if it gets too cold, if you get plastic too cold, it becomes really brittle and can crack. So if you get batteries too cold, then that's dangerous. If you get them too hot, plastic melts. So if it gets so hot that the plastic is going to melt, even if the battery itself, other components are fine, as soon as that plastic melts and there's a hole in it, the positive and negative pieces are going to touch, generate a lot of heat and electrical byproduct, and it's going to be dangerous. Physical damage. If you pierce it, if you crush it, if it takes too much vibration, it can crack. So any of those things that you think of that can damage this really thin piece of plastic, I think it is safe to say that's something that could damage the battery. So
Yeah.
keep that in mind as you're saying, well, did that really damage the battery? If I, I don't know, exposed it to something that, if it get wet also, maybe that doesn't damage the piece of plastic, but it can cause a short circuit. So water damage as well, especially with flooding that happens. There's a lot of flooding that goes on in the States and abroad.
Definitely. Yeah, and is the temperature getting too cold? Is that why, when we fly and you have to make sure, when my carry-on gets checked to go underneath and I have to pull things out. Is that because it would get too cold underneath the plane?
And I don't think that's the main reason. I have a lot of respect for everyone who works in the airlines, but I know they can be a little rough with your luggage when they're putting it in places, as well as the belts that carry them. You want to make sure that batteries aren't in there. If the belts are moving your luggage and transfer it, they can hit some bumps. They can be banged up a little bit. You want to make sure that a battery is not happening to it there. There have been fires from people's luggage that they put it underneath the airplane, not necessarily in the airplane itself, but before it gets to wherever they put it into. So I think that's the main reason, although I'm sure the temperature might have something to do with it too.
Gotcha. I was always curious why you always had to make sure you had everything out of your bag. Aside from, if it gets lost for some reason, I'm going to make sure I have my laptop at least with me, my valuables.
And then if you do have a fire, you want to be able to respond to that fire, and you can't really get to under the plane. So, as the plane's taking off and stuff, it can be a little jostled around your luggage. So you want to make sure that it's in the area where someone can respond to it. Typically, they have these bags that they put them in to try to contain the fire and smoke particles until they land or make an emergency landing.
Gotcha. Good to know. I also kind of wanted to talk about, we talked about educating, the fire departments and firefighters on how putting them out and raising awareness. Kind of what, is NFPA doing? What are you doing to kind of educate the public on, not only the dangers, but how, like I said, how to put them out, just how are you guys educating, the public about this?
Yeah, so we have a public education campaign. We have a lot of resources. Go to nfpa.org/batteries, nfpa.org/EVs, nfpa.org/lithium-ion batteries. We have a couple different landing pages with resources that you can share, things you can download, resources for fire departments as well. We have training. So if fire departments are unsure of how to respond to a lithium-ion battery fire, we have some training for them, public education materials that are freely available to download. We have blogs, articles. If you get more into the people who are designed to protect those, we have codes and standards as well. But as far as the public, we've been doing a public education campaign. I think it's really important to make sure that people are aware of this, the messaging gets to the people. And Fire Prevention Week as well is something that we always do, which is kind of our most successful public education campaign. So we've been doing a lot of things alongside that as well.
Yeah. And we'll make sure those URLs you just listed are in our show notes as well, so people can easily get to those. NFPA, whenever, we have you on, or whenever we talk about fire safety in general, you're our go-to with you have so many great resources. I especially love all of like the kids options there are too. Because, we talked about the holidays and toys and more things are having these batteries. It's also important to make sure, the kids are educated on even, what to look out for. And you guys have really great tools for that as well.
Cool. Appreciate that. Yeah, our public education team and advocacy teams do a lot of work for that.
Definitely. One other question I had, when I was thinking about my laptop, and my old laptop, I just got a new one, but the old one, would get hot at times. Is that a warning sign that something was maybe wrong with my battery? I just always kind of thought it was, well, this laptop's getting, not ancient, but ancient in, Apple Mac world. Those always seem to break every few years. They want you to buy the newest one. But is getting, hearing or feeling it get hot, and like, when you can kind of hear, like, it sounds like it's going to take off, like the fans are going, are those warning signs that maybe there's something wrong with my laptop and I should maybe stop using it?
The fan getting really loud, possibly, yes. Batteries in general are going to generate heat when they operate, and most things have something in them to help dissipate that heat.
Mm,
Like electric vehicles often have, some sort of cooling system, whether it's a water cooling system or other liquid cooling system, where it's basically they'll run cold liquid alongside the battery to make sure that it's constant, it's not getting too hot, right? It's staying in its optimal operating temperature. Um, Typically, again, batteries or laptops vary. They can be cooled by a fan, they can be liquid cooled, they can be air cooled. They can try to just say we have a large surface, and where so we should just be able to dissipate the heat on that large surface as long as the ambient temperature, the temperature outside, isn't too hot, then we should be fine. However, if you're always using that laptop on your bed or have pillows that are blocking the vent so it can't be air cooled as well, then that's going to make it so that battery potentially can get too hot.
mm,
Similar to your phone, your computer should say, "I'm too hot, I'm shutting down." But older computers that might not happen to. Dust, lint, things like that can get into your fan as well and stop that from working as well for cooling. Your CPU, computer processing unit, also gets very warm. So there are a few things in your computer that get warm when they operate. So it's kind of hard to tell necessarily if it's your battery, if it's something else. But I think the biggest thing is if you start to see a bulge anywhere near your laptop, then it's time to retire that laptop, because that's one of the indications that your battery is starting to fail.
gotcha. Well, I know we're getting a little closer to our time here, but you mentioned you've been with NFPA for almost 10 years now. What changes have you seen in the past 10 years in terms of lithium-ion batteries, or what's something maybe that surprised you about them, as you've kind of learned more about them? What are some updates you've seen?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that they're just being used more and more. We're getting better at developing these batteries. Lithium-ion batteries is pretty much an umbrella term that covers dozens of different technologies. But we're getting better at creating safer batteries, batteries that last longer, that can discharge electricity quicker at a higher rate, things like that. So we're seeing them get better and better. We're seeing the development of how we protect batteries, how we respond to fires with batteries, getting better and better. There's more research out there that's now available. When this first happened, there was not a lot of research at all because batteries were more expensive back then. I think in this economy, big screen TVs and batteries are the only things that are getting cheaper. But they are, in fact, or they have been getting cheaper over the past decade, and better. So it's really interesting to see that they're being used more and more. But just how firefighters are getting more used to responding to battery fires, that they know what to do a little bit better. There's more information out there, not just from NFPA, but from a lot of different nonprofit organizations that make sure that we're doing the best for our first responders and for the public. But still, the incidents are on the rise, and I don't know if it's because we're paying attention to these battery fires more before we labeled them incorrectly or didn't know what to look out for. But it's definitely something that's evolving. I think we're getting better at protecting the built environment, lives, people, property from these fires. Although I still think we have a ways to go. But in particular, I think this was a good example of how we can try to keep up with emerging technologies to make sure that we are keeping people safe and keeping pace with innovative technologies that are out there. Because oftentimes, if something gets created, we want to be able to look at it, test it, do the research, figure out what is the best way to do this. But with lithium-ion batteries, the market was so big and happened so quickly. Oftentimes, you see a saturation of the environment in batteries before we really knew what to do with them. So I feel like we're starting to catch up and know more and more of what to do when these fires are happening.
Definitely. And I know, we actually just did our State of the Survivor report, which was a survey we send out to, all the survivors in our community to take. And We always ask about like what advocacy, like issues do you want to see more awareness about, or what do you want to get more involved in? And this was, I think last year and this year where we had lithium-ion batteries on the list. And that continues to rise over time of people just wanting to learn more. And, we're also seeing more survivors have injuries caused by these batteries. I wouldn't say, even 5 years ago, we maybe had a few in our community that we knew of, but we're definitely seeing more and more, survivors, unfortunately, with injuries from these. Yeah.
And the rapid growth of these fires makes it that much harder to evacuate on time, right? Because you want to make sure you get out of there. And lots of times these can grow, and before you know it, grow into an out of control fire.
Definitely. Well, before we close out, I do just kind of want to learn a little bit more about, when I read your bio, talking about your expertise when it comes to healthcare facilities. So I just kind of wanted to learn a little bit more about, how you work with healthcare, hospitals, things like that, or kind of what your role is with those.
Yeah, so absolutely. I work a lot with NFPA 99, which is our healthcare facilities code, which basically has a lot of rules, because hospitals and healthcare facilities in general are so unique, because a lot of times the people who are there might not be fully conscious. They might be, under some sort of anesthesia. They might not be able to evacuate themselves. So there's a lot of unique things that happen in hospitals. One of them is that oxygen gets delivered to people. Oxygen is part of the fire triangle. So it's something that makes it everything in a hospital that's near oxygen a little bit more hazardous. And so with that, NFPA and NFPA's technical committees create a lot of rules to say, hey, this is how we want to make sure that hospitals are built and protected, so that if there is a fire, if there is an incident, we can either segment that area off and not have to evacuate the whole hospital, or if we do have to evacuate, that things are done right. If we lose power, we want to make sure that, people whose lives depend on, ventilators or things that need electrical power have that. So generating generators, backup oxygen, backup things that people might need to survive. So there's a lot of redundancies that are required in hospitals. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid actually requires compliance with our NFPA 99 healthcare facilities code. So if you are going to treat patients and collect from the Medicare and Medicaid, then you need to comply with this. And they have people who go through and do surveys to make sure that you are in compliance. It's just that hospitals, I think, are held to a higher standard, because even in emergencies, right? If there's a huge flood, storm, winter storm, you want your hospitals to stay open through those. If a hospital closes, then it's tough, because they have to go to adjacent hospitals. A lot of people's lives are at risk. We noticed this during the pandemic, that hospitals were getting overwhelmed. So we still want to be able to handle those while being fire safe. Fire isn't the only issue they have to deal with. They also have to deal with infection, is a huge one. So trying to balance that, saying we want fire safety, but we also want to acknowledge that you want to make sure that infection is as low as possible. So there's a lot of different moving pieces for healthcare facilities, and I think that's kind of what attracted me to it in the first place. But yeah, just the fact that it's very difficult to evacuate. You already have people who might not be at 100% health when they're in hospitals, actually exclusively those people. And so, that's something that you really want to make sure that if an incident happens, that you're able to respond, control it. You don't run out of oxygen, you don't run out of electricity, and that you're still able to care for those patients, even at a minimal level, to keep them alive when the worst of the worst happens.
Definitely. Yeah. Just listening to you kind of talk about all the, my head, especially working at home, it's my workplace and it's my home. I want to make sure it's as safe as possible, testing our fire alarms, things like that. And we've talked before in the show, like when you go out to dinner, like looking and seeing where your exits are and like little things like that. But, when you think about a hospital, like you said, there's the majority of people in the hospital probably aren't at 100% or even close to it. So, that just, if a fire does happen or, something like that, or if a battery, a lithium-ion battery at a hospital, catches fire, kind of how to keep everyone safe. So, it's, it just reminds me of like all the little things that are happening like behind the scenes to keep people safe that you don't think about at least I don't think about on a day-to-day basis. You may think about it every single day, but the normal person does not.
Yeah, agreed. I think, of course, it's important to be fire safe wherever we go, but hospitals just are at that elevated level, because if I do get injured elsewhere, I want to go to a hospital that's going to be safe for me. It's the last thing on people's mind as they're in hospitals is this building fire safe? So we want to make sure that they don't have to worry about that. That's something that's already taken care of. That's something that people are checking in on, that to make sure that it is happening. And I think we have healthcare facilities in general have a pretty good track record of that. So I'm pretty proud of NFPA's work in that sector.
For sure. No, and it's great too, hearing that, with the Medicaid and Medicare that you were talking about, that they require, the facilities to meet these codes and standards, going back to houses again, we have so many advocates who, with legislation and new home builds and making sure that these codes are part of, the housing process. I don't know all the ins and outs, but yeah, it's great to hear. Obviously, a hospital is much bigger than a home, but I wish more places would follow things like that and, abide by the codes and making sure, spending a little extra money for safety precautions. Everyone would rather have that, in my opinion, at the end of the day than, save a few bucks and not be as safe.
Agreed. Yes. And it's very nice to have something that pretty much across the board in the United States, people comply with. Being an international organization, it's tough to say, going from state to state, well, what codes and standards do I need to comply with? Well, it depends, right? Is always the answer. And it usually takes a little bit of homework to find that out. But for healthcare facilities, it might be a little bit more straightforward, because pretty much everywhere wants to accept Medicaid and Medicare.
Yeah. And, in terms of codes and standards and, just across the board, how often do those typically get updated, or is it all really just dependent on, each thing is obviously a little different. So I don't know if there's like a standard.
Yeah, so there's definitely we try to meet that balance of, we want to keep updating them as often as possible because technology keeps changing, the environment keeps changing. Things like lithium-ion batteries pop up here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But also we want to make sure that it's goes through a due process, so we're not rushing it and make mistakes. That we go through, we have a very transparent process. So we make sure that the public is able to participate at each step. The public is able to read and review any changes, and they have the time to review those changes. We don't want to change something and then not give people enough time to read them and understand them, or to say, oh, I think it should be different, but let me do my homework to see how it should be different. So we do have a pretty robust NFPA standards development process, which we have a great landing page which you can check out exactly how it works. But typically it's a 3 to 5 year cycle, which involves at least 2 robust, visits of, these are the recommended changes. Here's the justification for those recommended changes. We present it to the public, say, hey, does anyone in the public have any recommended changes? And then we also try to, get feedback on, here are the changes we did make. If you disagree with them or have any changes that we think we should further make, we have a step for that. And then we have a couple more steps that people are allowed to take if they still disagree with changes or they think it should be something slightly different. So it's a little bit of a complicated process, but I think complicated in a good way, in which we're able to incorporate a lot of the public. We're able to be transparent and publish all of our reports and changes, and able to kind of have a large group of stakeholders participate, so that make sure that everyone is happy, or at least everyone's equally unhappy with the changes.
No, that's awesome. I didn't realize, how much the public could get involved in that. So that's
So if anyone who does not work at NFPA wants to make a change, you're able to submit it to any code or standard, and then you will at the very least get a response saying, great recommendation, we incorporated it, or you get something that says, we didn't incorporate it and here's the reason why. But at least you're getting an explanation from a technical committee, which is a committee of experts on the industry. And people who make these changes or who vote on the changes, we make sure that it's not all manufacturers or all insurance or all enforcing authorities. We try to make sure it's a balanced and fair committee that has, voices from everyone who has to live with those codes and standards.
Definitely. No, it's amazing. I'll make sure we have that linked below as well for folks who just want to learn more, or, maybe they have a recommendation that they want to add.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's awesome. Well, I know we're coming up on our time and we do have 2 final questions, but before I ask you those, do you have anything else you want to share with our listeners today?
I think the biggest thing would be to spread the word, even just conversationally, about some of the hazards lithium-ion batteries can present. I don't think we need to necessarily scare anyone from not buying them again in the future. But I think it's something that the more people are aware of it, the more that we can take steps to help save ourselves and keep us and our loved ones safe.
For sure. For sure. I think, that awareness piece is so, so important. And I think we're getting better, but, it'd be nice that it's not just a bad rep that these batteries get, in the news and media and things like that. If we can just spread awareness, they can be safe. They are safe.
Because batteries do a lot of good in the world. Talking about healthcare, there are a lot of healthcare devices that need lithium-ion batteries or similar batteries to function and to save lives. So they do a lot of good things in the world, but we want to make sure that while we're bringing them into our lives, that we're aware of the hazards they also bring.
Definitely, definitely. Well, like I mentioned, we do always ask our guests 2 quick final questions. So the first one today is, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who is interested in fire protection engineering, what would it be?
One piece of advice. I think I love it. I'm very fortunate. I feel fortunate that I've stumbled into fire protection engineering. I think it combines a lot of things that I personally was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend anyone who's even slightly interested to try to pursue it, to learn more about it. There are, things you can do. You can get a bachelor's degree in fire protection engineering. You can get your master's degree. You can take an introductory course, just trying to learn more about it. I definitely recommend people pursue it. I think it's a fulfilling career as well. You're able to kind of see the impact in the world that your work does. I guess I would highly recommend it. Yeah.
That's awesome. We've had, I guess, 2 or 3 other engineers on, and they've all loved it as well. So I think it sounds like a great field. If you have a knack for it and you're interested in it, seems like everyone who is in it really enjoys it. So
I think that's the other part too, is I work with people who are also trying to do good things, right? You're trying to progress. So it ends up that you always run into and work with people who are working towards the same goal you are, right? To make the world a little bit more fire safe.
definitely, definitely. Well, it is time for our final question, which is our Phoenix partner question today, sponsored by NFPA. So, I think you kind of answered this a little bit earlier, but their question is, what is one thing you hope listeners take away from our podcast today?
I think the biggest thing that they take away is that, I feel like I don't want to repeat myself and just say that batteries can be dangerous. I'd probably say is recognizing a damaged battery. If a battery is producing heat when it's not being used, when it's swollen, if you see physical damage, cracking, if it looks like it has water damage in it, then that's something that you don't want to use. You don't want to have being in an enclosed space with it. Recognizing damaged batteries can be difficult if it's layered in a lot of different things. But recognizing that they can smell bad too. The gas you might not be able to see, but you'll be able to smell it. It's a very foul smell, similar to I'd say natural gas, but I haven't really smelt it because it's pretty toxic as well.
Yep.
But it's something that you want to be able to recognize, and then just to spread the word. I think, awareness is a huge factor in this. And I think the more people are aware of it, the more people can make smart decisions around batteries.
Definitely. Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on this show today. I loved, I learned so much. I always love when, I get educated on the podcast as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing, bringing awareness and sharing, some updates on lithium-ion batteries with us.
Thank you. And thank you too, Rachel. It's been awesome. You're a great host. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.